There has been a lot of movement on the trans issue in the last 48 hours. Yesterday, a supermajority of Republicans in the Kansas state legislature overrode the veto of their Democrat Governor Laura Kelly, the first veto action of the year. Both the Kansas State House and Senate bucked the governor to enact the Help Not Harm law that adds new restrictions to the use of state funds regarding the promotion of so-called gender transition surgeries. And in other action today, a federal judge, as I mentioned, permanently rejected the Biden administration's rewrite of Title IX. Now, it appears that the momentum is building against this radical ideology. Here now to discuss this and more, Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies here at the Family Research Council. Meg, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Tony. It's great to be here.
All right, let's start with what happened in Kansas. The legislature there overriding the governor, putting into place the 27th state to have a law on the books that would protect minors from these experimental surgeries and drugs used by those pushing this transgender ideology.
Right. And it's amazing to think that we still have to pass these laws, Tony. We've been working on this issue. FRC has certainly since 2018 or so, and trying to get states to pass these bills. And fortunately, we have seen growing momentum, but it's sad to think that a governor would override the veto, would veto this legislation when it protects children, it protects families from surgeries that are permanent, medication that causes permanent changes in the body. It's just sad to me to think that they had to override the veto, but fortunately they did.
We've actually seen even Republican governors in the last few years who vetoed this type of legislation, only to be overridden by their by their legislatures. I think of Arkansas, the first one where we worked on this. Ohio, another state. When we first picked this up back in 2016, 2017, in that period, no one else wanted to touch this. But now it is the momentum is certainly moving in this direction. Of course, the Trump administration coming in, putting an end to this nonsense, saying we are going to invite common sense back in. Is this a new day in America?
I really think that we have the wind at our backs now. I think that more and more people are aware that this is actually real. But before, when we talked about this issue with people, they would say, oh, no, that's not true. That's not possible. People are not really, no one would give a sex change operation to a minor. That's ridiculous. And, we seemed like the crazy people. But in fact, people have come to understand that, no, this is a real agenda. There are doctors who consider it medically appropriate to do these procedures on children. And so now, at least in the state of Kansas and 26 other states, children will be protected from this, and parents will have the right, people who are victimized by these procedures will have the right to sue the medical providers who gave them this so-called care, which is a great, great development.
And this is good. This is certainly encouraging to see, maybe this is a red line, but should we really be surprised when we kind of trace back the steps, the redefinition of marriage and the embracing of a redefinition of human sexuality? I mean, should we be surprised that it's come to this point?
Sure, and the governor in her veto used language talking about the importance of the doctor-patient relationship, which is, of course, the same thing they always trot out to justify abortion. So yes, the reasons for this state we're in now, of course, we're all aware of, right? That we didn't just get here overnight, but it is certainly nice when we see that we are making gains in rolling some of the sexual revolution agenda back and at least giving parents the control over their children and this ability to veto these procedures for their kids, right. And not be deceived.
I mean, I think they've gone so far that common sense is screaming out that we've got to do something, and that's where we see from the Trump administration. But I've said this many times, we've got to have the underpinnings of this, and that is moral, absolute truth. This is as much a spiritual issue as it is a policy issue, and there's a lot of work to be done to shore up the foundations here. I want to go to another topic. Department of Education investigating the Arlington County Public Schools for their transgender bathroom policy. Now, this is a sharp contrast, as I provided at the top of the program, between the Biden administration, who would probably have been investigating these parents. Now you have the Trump administration actually taking the complaint of the parents and investigating the school district.
Right. This case is another one that just beggars belief. You have the case of a convicted sex offender, this man named Richard Cox, who is identifying as transgender so that he can be naked in front of children, which is the crime that he went to jail for as a sex offender. And that is all justified by the fact that he feels that he is actually a woman, or claims to feel that way. And that is how he gets access to the women's locker rooms. And this school system in Arlington uses the county's swimming pool for their school programs for swim teams. They share that space. And so it's just a really dangerous situation. It's unbelievable that this has been tolerated for so long. He's been in there for years. And the county prosecutor in our area refuses to prosecute him, even with the Attorney General of the state encouraging that prosecution. And it's all based on this idea that someone can be born in the wrong body or identify as the opposite sex, which we know is just simply not true. And for people who are confused about that, that's one thing. We're concerned for them. We want them to get care. But this person has convictions for sex offenses and seems to be hiding behind a transgender ideology to use that to his favor. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we've warned about as we've talked about this issue over the years. I'm very grateful that the Defense of Freedom Institute made such a thorough complaint about this to the Department of Education, and that they're taking that up. But we shouldn't have to rely on federal civil rights protections when there are clearly criminal charges that could be made against this person in Arlington County. If the police would come when women call and say there's a man in the locker room who's naked with my children, you would think that that would get a police call and a police response, but not in Arlington, apparently.
No, in some places it actually gets the people issuing the complaint banned from the facility.
Right.
But maybe this is a turning point where there's a revival of common sense. But again, it's got to be undergirded by an understanding of moral truth, of transcendent truth.
Yes, and it also gets back to that issue of free speech that we were talking about last week, that the vice president brought up at the speech at the security conference. You know, when you're not allowed to talk about things, when I'm not allowed to complain about a man being in my locker room, even if he says he's a woman, that's exactly how we get to this place. And so we really do need to appreciate the freedoms that we have here in the United States and exercise those freedoms, be involved in our local communities, and use every tool we have to make sure that we are communicating these truths in the public square, because apparently people need reminding.
Right. About a minute and a half left. Meg Kilgannon, a federal judge in Texas, Judge Reed O'Connor, struck down the Biden administration's kind of one of their final rule changes on Title IX, the redefinition of sex to include gender. Is this going to be the end of this effort to try to roll gender into the definition of sex?
Well, it certainly is for the Trump administration. They have already reoriented the policy back to the 2020 rule. And I think that there were so many cases that went in opposed to the Biden rule that some of those are still going to be working their way through the court system, and so we'll see rulings like this. And it's always great to see them, because here's another situation, another permutation of what's wrong with the Biden Title IX plan, what is wrong with trying to conflate sex and gender, and so now we see another judge is on the side of right on that.
Will those remain as an obstacle to a future administration that might try to do that?
Yes, they will.
Good. All right, Meg Kilgannon, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tony.